Well, just think. A little girl born today in France, you know, the home of Les Mis and Marie Antoinette, stands a better chance of getting ahead in the world than a low-income little boy born in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, if I had told this to my Danish grandmother back in her day, she would have laughed and laughed. She would have said, well, that was the whole reason we came to America, then came to Iowa, was to get away from these land of little hope and to the land of opportunity. And in fact, that's indeed our bedrock promise that we've made to generations of people. And we tell in stories from Daniel Boone to Abraham Lincoln to Steve Jobs, that if you come and work in the United States and work harder than ever, you will get ahead better in the United States and in America than in any other place in the world. But unfortunately, that's too often now becoming a myth for too many. Now, we do know, of course, that there is plenty of opportunity out there. And we do know, of course, that there are success stories of folks who have actually been able to succeed despite the most serious odds. But unfortunately, that is not the reality for most. Now, the hopeful note here is that this is not inevitable. In fact, we have done this to ourselves, and so therefore we can undo it. And since we can undo it, what do we need to do? The first thing we need to do is snap out of it. Now, when I graduated from high school in 1979, little did I know that I was at the cutting edge of a major turning point in world history. Well, I didn't know it at the time, of course. But I just thought it was a time of bad haircuts and even worse leisure suits. But at that time, scholars have now defined this as the end of an era, the beginning of a new era in which new world leaders took the stage and in which there was significant changes in international relations and economic issues, that there was recessions and long gas lines that forced the hand of many governments around the world, that there was a change to lower public spending, there was a lower regulation, less taxes, and in fact it ushered in a message and a theme that we have heard over and over again in the years since. Now, this is not at all the reality of my daily life. Back in 1979, that generation, I saw government actually as being very helpful. I saw government as being the kind of thing that I saw every day. It was the public schools that I attended. It was the libraries that I used. It was the streets that I learned to drive on. It was the DMV where I got my first driver's license. It also was the people that I knew. It was my neighbors. It was my coaches, my teachers, my employers, the very people that I saw every day. And they worked together in government to make us, to result in a mutual benefit for everyone. They made us stronger, not weaker. And as I grew older, I saw that government did many, many more things. It actually did things like building things and creating things and doing things and actually moving forward on educating and training and cleaning things up. It actually helped to ensure that people are treated fairly despite where they come from or no matter what they look like. It actually made sure that the advantages that those who have actually gone up the economic ladder are actually not repeated over and over for just those limited few. In other words, government was about providing hope and opportunity. Government helped people to move up in life. Now, like with anything, of course, made out of people, it was not always successful, nor was it always right. But you know, I knew we needed it, and at that time I watched Walter Cronkite every night, and that's just the way it was. But I will say this. The major turning point in 1979 has become the conventional wisdom. And the traditional government that I understood over the last 30 years has dribbled away little by little. Now, during this time, I've been able to have a very successful and very fruitful public interest career, working with people from all kinds of walks of life in all parts of the country. And I have to say, they all share the same basic values and beliefs. And one of the beliefs that they share is that they believe that everybody deserves the same kind of good home, good education, good job, health care, a stable family, really a future. And they don't believe it just for themselves. They believe that everybody should have this. And I saw that in the work that I did with family farmers who were out there digging themselves out from under debt so that they could continue to support themselves and work in their community. I saw it working with single moms who had 2 or 3 low-wage jobs just so they could get the child care and the health care so they could support their family and continue to be functional in the community. I saw it with meatpacking workers who fought their way through injuries, and repeated injuries, just so they could bring home enough to pay the rent. And immigrant workers who were willing to take the hardest jobs and the oddest jobs because they had kids at home to feed. But you know, in my career, I also work with lawyers and bankers and doctors and businessmen and political leaders. And you know, they also share the same desires and beliefs that these people do. That is, they are looking out for their family, they're working hard for the future, and they want to ensure that they have a decent future. Now, one of the realities here is that government is one of those things that people are people. that we in fact share a common bond. That is, we are out there today with this basic belief, sharing the common bond that we have for each other. So therefore, what does government do? It delivers on that common bond. Now, in my experience, government has done a number of things. And historically, government has been able to accomplish things that have made a powerful difference in the lives of Americans. For example, today we would have 40 million more people in poverty, but for significant government programs such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, or the fact that we index Social Security to inflation, and food stamps. Another thing that I often hear is that the war on poverty back in the 60s was a failure. Well, I'm here to say that actually it was a success. In 1963, when Lyndon Johnson started this program, the poverty rate in the United States was 19.5%. In 1969, when he left office, it was down to 12%. More importantly, that children's poverty had actually dropped by 9% in that time period. Now, this wasn't done by overly generous welfare payments. This is done through jobs programs and education and training and child care and health care, the very kinds of things that help people to succeed. Now, one of the things that we come to is that recent economic data has come out about where are we today. The Census Bureau has come out with income and poverty data that suggests that we actually have two economies today. Well, on the one hand, we have an economy that is delivering for higher income people by lifting income, and on the other hand, we have an economy that is failing to reach down the economic ladder to everyone else. For example, there are many ways to look at this, and one of the ways to look at this is the issue of what's the goal for the gap between the most prosperous and everyone else. And in 2012, according to the Census Bureau and their income data, we are now at the biggest goal for gap that we've ever seen in American history. Another way to look at this is the whole issue of whether or not what happens with economic growth and income growth. And does this, in fact, allow for situations where concentration occurs? And unfortunately, concentration of income in America today is at the highest level it's been since 1927, shortly before the Great Depression. And the folks that are in the middle, as you move down the economic ladder, the folks in the middle, where are they today? Well, unfortunately, you look at their situation and you realize that their income has not budged at all in the last 25 years. And if you go all the way down the income ladder, you'll see that there are situations where people are making, where poverty is now deeper, broader, and in fact more extreme than in most situations. Now, I obviously, based upon what I've just described here, believe that government can actually make a difference, that it actually does affect the ability to get people out of poverty and address inequality. But you know, it also addresses issues related to prosperity and sharing prosperity and moving people up the economic ladder. I'll give you 3 examples. Talk to a farmer you know that his farm dates back to the Homestead Act and that he still receives farm subsidies to this day. Or talk to your grandfather, perhaps, who went to the University of Nebraska land-grant university on the GI Bill and then led to a successful career in a bank. Or talk to even your father, who got his first construction job working on the interstate highway system, which in turn allowed him to start his own successful construction firm. So the reality is that today in America, we are seeing these two economies at play. The unfortunate reality is that Americans continue to believe that in America you can get ahead better than any other country in the world. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Statistics and data are showing that in America today we are called a low mobility country. What does that mean? It means basically that if you're in the lower income and middle income income households, you have a very difficult time moving or providing advantages to the children that parents have a hard time providing advantages to children. Now, this is in comparison to mid-range countries, mid-mobility countries such as France, Germany, Sweden, and then higher economic mobility countries such as Finland, Norway, Denmark, and to our north, Canada. And in those countries, what they're doing is they are able to deliver advantages to children in a way that we are not able to right now in America. And in fact, the odds are better in those countries that the children will do better than their parents. Whereas in America, unfortunately, when we have few advantages to pass along from low to middle income, these advantages no longer are there to pass along. So what does that mean? Is there a common thread that goes through these countries? Are they doing something we're not doing? Is there significant growth, income growth, or faster growth there in these countries that would suggest why they're able to do this? And the common thread is this. Each of these countries have a child poverty rate that is less than 5%. In America, our child poverty rate is 25%, almost 25%. When you look at that, what you realize is in these other countries, what's happening is when the youth join the labor market, what happens is they have the kind of equal opportunity that here in America we can only dream about. Now, no matter your prescription for this grim set of statistics that I just tried to quickly outline for you, there's no question that it really boils down to an abandonment of some basic ideals. Because we're pulling people apart, it radically shrinks down our sense of community. It affects our sense of we. It also affects and is a big part of our broken political decision-making process. And obviously, it has an impact on the opportunities that people have, so they can't reach the next rung on the ladder, which leads to social stratification, which unfortunately means that the United States of America is at risk of becoming just as atrophied as those countries our ancestors left many generations ago. Well, before our great-grandparents and grandparents roll over in their graves right now hearing all this, there is again one word of hope. This is not inevitable. We've done this to ourselves. We can undo it. And from my point of view, it's to get back to the traditions and the values of my youth. It's back when government was doing more. It was building things, creating things, teaching and educating, when it was investing, when it was doing the kinds of things to ensure that people were treated fairly. But it also means we need to look at the younger generation today, what they're doing, how they're doing things. They're wonderfully idealistic. They have the ability to think about and think through ways of solving problems and using their new skills. These aren't narcissistic, in my daily life, I have the opportunity to work with many, many idealistic young leaders. And what I see is not these narcissistic Gen Yers taking selfies and posting them on the internet, but rather what I see are folks thinking about how they can use the social media skills and the networking skills to accomplish the goals of broader change and positive change for people. In particular, there are two examples. One is Nebraskans for Civic Reform here in Nebraska has a wonderful project called the Civic Engagement Project, where they send mentors out into middle schools and ninth grades to talk to kids about becoming the owners of their democracy. And they talk about how to think critically, how to talk civilly about difficult issues, and most importantly, how to learn that government is in fact of, by, and for them, not for somebody else. And it also goes to the question of whether or not, there's another example, Character Counts, which is a wonderful way of building ethical behavior programs into schools that talk about mutual obligation and mutual responsibility, what is that? The social contract, the basic building block of our democracy. Well, I can say this, the younger generation is going to be pushing people like myself out of the way very soon. And the reality is that we need to make sure that we don't leave them too big a mess. But in the meantime, you're going to have quite a bit of noise to listen to. You're going to have a lot of folks that are continuing to talk about how government, from folks actually that I believe have abandoned American ideals and are talking about how government should be limited and should be out of people's lives. Well, my advice to you is very simple. Simply repeat to yourself, I do want to continue American tradition. I do want to see American ideals come to life. I do want to see our government provide opportunity for all. So, we are snapping out of it. We are putting the '79 generation behind us, and we're looking at the younger generation and thinking how they can be helpful into the future. We are realizing this is not inevitable, that we have done this to ourselves, so we can undo it. So when you think about and look about and wonder about that young boy in Lincoln, Nebraska who wakes up each morning short on food and short on hope, the thing to remember is this, that we all control the kind of future that we can offer him and his children. And we can act through government to provide the kind of hope and opportunity for him and his generation that the generations before him both expected and received. Thank you very much.